that one out. So
Thank you so much.
sure.
Yes, we are, T minus whatever until these elections coming up. And, now it's in the story. Now we're seeing some, strife as far as some things happening. Looking at the Paul Pelosi incident, you're looking at the threats coming up on Darren Bailey. I think Andy told me about a politician in Pennsylvania that was attacked. I mean, it's happening, stuff like this. Your expertise from what you've seen and everything like that, is this abnormal, or is this stuff you kind of see as elections kind of?
Well, I would say I think American politics has always been pretty rough and tumble, but this seems different. I mean, I think we have a really close fight for control of Congress. The electorate is very divided. Some really hot button issues: abortion, crime, inflation, which really has partisan energies aroused. And so I think it's, I think but the politics has changed. I mean, parties have disagreed in the past, but they've tended to make it, to a large extent on substance and issues. Now, politics has become a part of our identity. And, it's almost like someone from a different party has a different set of values. And that makes things more hair trigger. And I think, the violence now is, I think, we've had violence before. It seems to be encouraged, apologized for on social media. Some of the partisan cable networks have effectively apologized for it, disputed facts. So I think, our politics have entered, I think, a pretty hard place where we have hard issues, no clear solutions, fierce partisanship. And I think you have to say that the Republican Party has shifted significantly since the rise of Donald Trump. And, President Trump, former President Trump, to the best of my knowledge, is the only presidential candidate I've ever seen who would at rallies encourage or violence, or to be playful about the threat of violence. And I think this is sent as a signal to his followers that, violence is part of the political discourse. But it happens on the other side, as you mentioned. There was a threat to Senator Bailey. So I don't know. I mean, the big question is this just a bad part of the cycle in which, we are particularly inflamed and there's so much uncertainty, or have we kind of hit a place where we continue to go downward and norms have been eclipsed? And I think the one thing that troubles me too is even when you watch some of the debates, like on TV, C-SPAN, debates have changed. It wasn't that long ago that the sort of thing that you see right now every day would be considered not only unacceptable behavior for candidates, it would be considered disqualifying. To interrupt, to shout, to laugh, to mock. That's just behavior that is, that cannot become the norm. If it does, we will not have a functioning democracy.
Yeah, we don't watch debates anymore because we want to hear about policies. We want to watch to see the Jerry Springer stuff of what goes on. I totally agree with you there. I can't even watch debates anymore.
Well, no, and I'm not, as a political junkie, I would say the same. I mean, they have become unwatchable. And, I don't know when for me, it first started, and again, I'm not pointing everything on Trump, but, the 2016 presidential debate with Hillary Clinton, in which, he clearly did not prepare on substance and just, was mocking and derisive. And then the 2020 debate between Biden and Trump, which was unwatchable. But if you look at Senate and gubernatorial debates, there are few of them. But the ones that you do have are fiercely personal, non-substantive. They're really disgraceful, I would say. And they do not respect the voters. And, which one of us would feel comfortable comporting ourselves professionally in the way that we see during these political debates? And it's...
Do you feel that, it seems like, fair or not, both sides try to somewhat take advantage of it, in the sense of, Darren Bailey is trying to blame J.B. Pritzker for his rhetoric.
Yeah.
And it's vice versa. It's not just J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah.
They try to blame the Republicans or the Democrats. Do you think that's fair to label that as the Republicans do this or the Democrats do this? Or should we just be focusing on these people are deranged, these people are not well, these are isolated issues? Do you think it's fair to lump people in that's a Republican, that's a Democrat, they're at fault kind of thing?
I think there's been a kind of a bipartisan race to the bottom in terms of civility, professionalism, respect for opponents, respect for voters. I think both parties have allowed their standards to drop dramatically. And it's it's not a singular one-party issue. I do think, I know it's not popular to say this, I do think one party is more at fault than the other. I do think the Republicans have embraced this more enthusiastically and more uncritically. And I think that they have played a larger role in this. But once a campaign unfolds, it's brass knuckles time, and both parties are pulling out the brass knuckles or the MK-47s and just blasting away at each other. So I think both parties are at fault, and it's going to take a kind of a rethinking. And I guess I had thought that January 6th might be the moment when people just pull back and say, look, if we keep going down this path, we are going to ruin this amazing country. But the fever hasn't broken, and there are lots of reasons, but the fever hasn't broken. And it seems like this election, in some sense, has been almost a continuation of January 6th. And that's what's troubling, because, we got a look at what happens when we lose all boundaries and all respect for our institutions, including the Capitol building. And once you start destroying, boundaries and guardrails and institutions, it's hard to get back, and it's hard to unring the bell.
Do you feel, like through your research of elections and stuff like that, you could always debate about voter turnout, but is the more and more is that just driving people away from voting?
Well, but in 2018, there was a record turnout for midterms. 2020, in the middle of a pandemic, there was pretty high turnout. I think they're expecting the 22 elections to have relatively high turnout compared to midterm elections. So, I think it's turning voters off, no doubt. But and it's probably turning voters away.
Would you say it's turning voters off of the campaign but not actually voting?
Well, I think it's complicated. I think it's certainly turning them away from the campaign. They just turn off the commercials and don't watch the debates and so forth. That I think that is clear. I think what these fiercely partisan campaigns do is it drives the partisans to vote, which is what midterm elections are about. You want to get your base to come out and vote. By and large, you're not trying to win over independents. You're just trying to get your people to come out to the polls. And when you have sharp rhetoric, and when you depict your opponent as someone who's going to undermine democracy, that has a way of energizing your voters in a negative way. And I think the thing that troubles me most now about where we're at is what political scientists call negative partisanship, which means I don't necessarily think my party is very good, but I think the other party is really, really awful. And I think if people from that party are elected, they're going to destroy the country. I'm putting it in the strongest terms. And so what we have is this sense of disappointment. Even a passionate Democrat is probably disappointed in his or her party, but they think that the Republicans are even much worse. And so, as I tell my students, you should expect more from your party than the other party. If you're a Democrat and you say I'm from the party of Roosevelt and Kennedy, you should expect more. And if you're a Republican, you say I'm from the party of Reagan and Eisenhower and George H.W. Bush, and I should expect more. So I'm hoping we can get to that point where the fever finally breaks. People realize that the level of debates that we are now having are just moving in the really wrong direction. And once you start conducting yourself like that, it's just hard to walk back, and it's hard to deal with people once you get elected. I mean, you know, I was asked about one candidate who was just very, very shrill and fiercely partisan, and the interviewer said, "Well, but it works, doesn't it?" And this is a congresswoman, and I said, "It depends what you mean by works. Does she get reelected? Yeah. Has she ever passed a law? No. Has she ever done anything to improve the life of her constituents, to make the life of her community better? I mean, isn't that the standard by which we, you know, measure public service? Not whether you can just fire up enough of your voters to get, you know, re-up for 2 more years."
So do you feel that kind of also sometimes brings shame to a voter? In other words, like, I'm a Republican, like you mentioned, like, you know, if you're a Democrat, if you're like I said, Isaac Kennedy or a Roosevelt Kennedy Democrat, be proud of that.
Yeah.
If you do you think that people are now kind of like, yeah, you know what, I'm a Republican, but I don't like the way Trump does things. I don't like, or I am a Democrat. I mean, I've heard Democrats that aren't fans of Biden.
Yeah.
That's just how politics are.
Yeah.
Do you think that makes people a little bit more of like, no, I don't like to admit that I'm a Republican, or I don't like to admit that I'm a
Yeah,
Democrat.
I mean,
this what's going on? It's just hard for people to basically be proud one way or the other of being whatever politics they are.
yeah, I mean, you know, and it's, on the one hand, I think politics has almost taken too much space in our lives because it's become almost a way of defining who we are as a person and what our values are. So in one sense, politics has taken up a lot of space, but it's also become so hugely charged that, you know, whereas in the past you might have neighbors who, you know, one's a Democrat, Republican, and they could have kindly, fun, spirited disagreements on, you know, issues and policies and still be friends at the end of the day. And realize that the other person still was a good person of value. But now, I mean, people are shying away from these debates because they're afraid that it's going to unravel and that it's going to turn into a shouting match. And, you know, you're going to close the door and say, "I don't want to see you again," you know. So,
or something worse.
Or worse, that's right, yeah.
So, you know, again, like, you know, through your studies of politics and campaigning and stuff like that, you kind of touched base on it a little bit earlier, but as far as, you know, the history of this kind of stuff, where is this compared? Or are we in such an age where, you know, these and 24 access to news and information, and I can click on one button and I can tell the world how I feel about such and such person and everything? I mean, I can just think of, you know, what if Twitter and Instagram and Facebook existed back, you know, during the John Quincy Adams versus Jackson campaigns and stuff like that. So are we just living in an age where stuff is just way too much accessible for us to be able to...
No, I think that's a good point. I mean, I do, you know, as I said, American politics has always been rough and tumble, and there's been lots of invective hurled back and forth. What's different now is we have that, and it's magnified 1,000-fold by social media, by cable TV, which both records these difficult moments, transmits them, in some sense amplifies them, encourages more behavior. So I think part of it is that, you know, I think we're in a tense, difficult time, but it's, I think, magnified dramatically by social media and other technologies.